Congressmember Judy Chu from California's 27th Congressional District, and I'm chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or what we call CAPAC. Today, I will be chairing an important congressional forum on the alarming rise of anti-Asian bigotry during the coronavirus pandemic. And I want to thank my good friends of the Congressional Tri-Caucus, the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Joaquin Castro, and chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Karen Bass, for co-hosting this event with me today. I also want to thank my fellow CAPAC colleagues who are participating today, as well as our witnesses and Asian American and Pacific Islander leaders from across the country who are joining us virtually. Since the beginning of this year, Asian Americans all across the nation have been terrified by the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents related to the coronavirus, in which innocent Asian Americans have been targeted with racism and violence. It started in January with dirty looks, insults, and misinformation that Asian American restaurants and businesses were more likely to have the disease and should be avoided. But in the last few months, it's escalated to spitting, yelling, and physical attacks against Asian Americans all across the nation, including the stabbing of a family of 3 in an Asian American family, including 2 children, ages 2 and 6, at a Sam's Club in Texas, by a man who said he wanted to kill Asian Americans because of the coronavirus. This xenophobia has been exacerbated by President Donald Trump, who's trying to direct anger at China in order to deflect blame for his delayed and failed response to the coronavirus crisis. He and his followers have repeatedly used the terms Chinese virus, Wuhan virus, and now Kung flu to refer to coronavirus, even though health experts at the CDC and World Health Organization have repeatedly warned not to associate the disease with a specific geographic location or ethnicity due to the stigma it causes. And that is why they officially use the scientific and neutral term COVID-19. They know that associating COVID-19 with China has perpetuated the false belief that people of Chinese or Asian ancestry are more likely to carry and spread the disease and should be blamed for it. In fact, according to data compiled by various AAPI hate crime reporting sites, there have been over 2,400 anti-Asian hate incidents reported in recent months. However, we estimate the numbers to be even higher due to underreporting and the fact that many Asian Americans are fearful to come forward. And this is only reinforced by a survey conducted by the Center for Public Integrity, showing that over 30% of Americans have witnessed someone blaming Asian people for the virus. The danger of anti-Asian bigotry is what led us in CAPAC to take action immediately. We have taken President Trump and his followers on every time they use the terms Chinese virus, Wuhan virus, or Kung flu. We've issued statements and written letters to the White House and the Department of Justice urging them to ensure that Asian Americans are not racially targeted. We've taken actions in Congress as well. Earlier this year, we held a press conference to denounce such terminology with a representative from the CDC who said that stigma is the enemy of public health. And when I became aware in February that even my fellow colleagues in Congress were not aware of the extent of the anti-Asian xenophobia, we sent a letter to all of our colleagues in the House and Senate, urging them to avoid spreading xenophobia and to only share verifiable information and facts about COVID-19. Furthermore, 2 of our CAPAC members, Congressmember Grace Meng from New York and Senator Kamala Harris from California, introduced a congressional resolution to condemn anti-Asian coronavirus bigotry that has already received broad support in Congress. We also passed the bipartisan No Hate Act out of the House, which would help to improve hate crime reporting and provide more resources to respond to these incidents. And just last month, on behalf of CAPAC, I sent a toolkit to all of my colleagues in Congress, which included messaging guidance on how to avoid spreading anti-Asian xenophobia. Throughout all of this, I've been so gratified that on multiple occasions, colleagues from the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and Congressional Native American Caucus have stood with us in solidarity to show that communities of color must stand united in denouncing xenophobia, and violence. As a nation, we must work together to root out hate and to ensure that all Americans, regardless of their race or ethnicity, feel safe in our country. I want to thank all of the witnesses here today for their willingness to share their expertise and their stories. Before we go into witness testimony, I would like our co-hosts to comment. Karen Bass will be joining us later during the Q&A. But right now, I would like to turn it over to Congressional Hispanic Caucus Chair Joaquin Castro from Texas for his opening remarks, after which we will hear our 5 witnesses. After the witness testimony, I will recognize members for their questions. And now I'd like to recognize the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Joaquin Castro.
Well, thank you, Judy. Hi, everyone. And thank you to KPAC and to Judy Chu, Congresswoman Chu, for her leadership in convening this forum. The Hispanic Caucus, the Black Caucus, and Native American Caucus co-chair Deb Haaland and I are here in solidarity to reject the rise of anti-Asian bigotry during the coronavirus crisis. This threat, as you all know, is not new. There have been dark moments in our history, from the Chinese Exclusion Act to the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, to the scapegoating of Middle Eastern and South Asian communities after 9/11. But now it's more pernicious during this global pandemic, and more dangerous due to a president who fans the flames of racism and the fear of others for political gain. Unfortunately, we've seen acts of anti-Asian hate in my hometown of San Antonio and my state of Texas. For example, at a local restaurant, one marquee read, "Don't eat Chinese, eat American." Now, even if the billboard was meant in jest by the person who put it up, we know that the impact is the same. It's to direct anger and fear and hatred at a community. At a grocery store in Texas, as Judy mentioned, a man stabbed several members of an Asian American family, threatening the lives of children as young as 2 years old. He attacked them because he thought the family was Chinese and associated that belief with spreading the virus. This president has actively incited this racism by insisting on calling COVID-19, quote unquote, a Chinese virus and other racist terms. We need to push back hard on that rhetoric in the short term, and at the same time push for structural changes in the long term to fight this kind of racism. That starts with ensuring minority populations have full representation in our democracy. That means we need to complete the census for an accurate count, for example. I'm proud that the CHC has partnered with KPAC on this effort. It also means that data must be disaggregated by race and ethnicity. Data equity is a civil rights issue in today's America. As we see with the current pandemic, we must also recognize that the way our nation conducts foreign policy has a direct impact on Asian Americans. While the actions of the Chinese government pose serious foreign policy challenges for the United States, leaders have a responsibility to address this challenge in a responsible way without feeding into xenophobia and racism, as his president and his allies have too often done. We can both call out actions by the Chinese government, such as the ethnic cleansing of Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and also welcome Chinese students to study in our world-class universities. And we also have to be vigilant with the media in Hollywood about the portrayal of Asian Americans. This is an issue that I've worked on with respect to Latinos in publishing, news, films, and on television. The stories told of our communities should be told by our communities. Let's be clear. People of Asian heritage, just like those of Latino descent, are Americans, period. I'm grateful for the work of my colleagues in KPAC and looking forward to continuing our strong partnership moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Castro. And I'd like to now introduce today's panelists. Manjusha Kulkarni is the Executive Director of the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council, or APCON. It is a coalition of over 40 community-based organizations that serve and represent Asian Pacific Islanders in Los Angeles County. APCON is one of the lead organizations documenting anti-Asian hate incidents, and Manjusha will share some of their findings as well as information on where Asian Americans can go to report a hate crime or incident. Tani Jirapra-Pasuk from California is a mindful meditation facilitator and an independent filmmaker and writer. Earlier this year, she was verbally assaulted while riding the metro in Los Angeles by a man who hurled racial insults at her related to the coronavirus. She will share her personal story and discuss why it is critical for Asian Americans to speak up if they experience coronavirus-related discrimination. John Yang is the president and executive director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, which is one of the largest Asian American civil rights organizations in the nation. He will share the work that his organization is doing to address anti-Asian bigotry, including encouraging Asian Americans to report hate incidents and hosting virtual bystander intervention trainings. Zach Owen is the brave young man who risked his life earlier this year to save a Burmese American family who were racially targeted in a hate crime attack at a Sam's Club in Midland, Texas. Zach will share his personal story about what happened that day and discuss the importance of bystander intervention. Michael Yaki is a commissioner with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. He will be sharing some of the findings from the Commission's recent report on hate crimes, as well as recommendations on steps that the federal government can take to prevent and address hate crimes against Asian Americans. I want to welcome all of our distinguished panelists and thank you for participating in today's Congressional Forum. I'd like to begin our panel by recognizing Ms. Manjusha Kulkarni.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Congresswoman Chu, Congressman Castro, Congresswoman Bass, and members of the Tri-Caucus for the opportunity to testify before you today. With Chinese for Affirmative Action and San Francisco State University's Asian American Studies Department, APCON, the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council where I work, launched on March 19th, 2020, Stop AAPI Hate, the nation's leading aggregator of COVID-19 related hate incidents against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. In 19 weeks, we have received almost 2,600 self-reported incidents from across 45 states and the District of Columbia. That includes an additional 200 in just the past few weeks since this forum was originally planned to be held. From analysis of the Stop AAPI hate data conducted by researchers on our team, we have learned the following. The vast majority of acts involve hate incidents, not hate crimes. 70% of the incidents involve verbal harassment, 9% physical assaults, and 8% involve civil rights violations, including refusal of service and workplace discrimination. 40% of the incidents take place at private businesses, 30% on public sidewalks, public parks, and in public transit, and 10% occur online. Women are experiencing incidents of hate at rates over 2.5 times that of men, and 1 in 12 individuals who experience hate are seniors. Additionally, 40% of individuals experiencing hate are Chinese American, followed by 18% who are Korean American, and the rest being in other segments of the Asian American community. In addition to our reporting center, Stop AAPI Hate is developing resources for community members who experience hate and advocating with local, state, and federal officials for policy solutions. Among the strategies we have shared with Governor Newsom, some attorneys general, and local human relations commissions are strengthening the enforcement of existing civil rights laws, urging school districts to declare schools as safe havens and provide necessary policies and protocols to address bias-based bullying, highlighting mechanisms for the provision of mental health services, and addressing the impacts of racism and xenophobia on public health. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to testify, to share our data and overall work of Stop AAPI Hate with you today. We look forward to providing our data and analysis and continuing to work with KPAC on developing policy solutions so that Asian Americans can live free from racial discrimination and enjoy the same opportunities and rights as other Americans. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we will hear from Ms. Tani Jarapapasuk.
Members of Congress, distinguished guests, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my story. I am Tani Rutta Jarapapasuk, and I was verbally assaulted by a man who was anti-Asian, who used anti-Asian and xenophobic language. I am of Thai descent and the first in my family to be born in the United States. My mother and father immigrated to this country because they wanted to give their children the opportunity to become anything they dreamt of. As a kid, I learned to get used to the fact that I was always going to be seen as an outsider and not as an American. I learned to dismiss and translate the microaggressive questions and comments like, "Where are you from?" knowing that no one was really interested in hearing California. They were really asking that what they really want to know was, what exotic land are you from? And making me feel like an outsider. I have experienced racism, anti-Asian bigotry, and xenophobia most of my life. It wasn't until COVID-19 and the insistence on leadership and some media calling it the China virus that I experienced a blatant attack because of my face. The night of February 1st, 2020 was when I decided that I had had enough of feeling like an outsider. My friend and I were heading home from downtown LA. It was an ordinary except for the looming fears of the coronavirus. Other than that, we were just two Angelenos amongst other Angelenos. A man then started to say something about Chinese people, and at that time, it didn't occur to me that he was speaking about anyone specific on the train. I then realized that I was the only Asian American on board. The man gestured his body in my direction and used derogatory language about Chinese people. I don't want to repeat all of the vulgarities he used, but he said that every disease has come from China and that everything comes from China because they're effing disgusting. That ordinary Saturday night turned into a nightmare. After about 10 minutes of expletives and ranting, I looked around the train for an ally. Every man averted my eyes, and I felt alone, and I even wondered if they thought that I was deserving of the assault. Eventually, an African-American woman locked eyes with me and gave me a smile. It was a friendly face that I needed. Not knowing what he was going to do to me next, I took my phone out of my purse and pressed record. If he was going to physically assault me, at least I was going to have evidence to show. That night changed my life. I lost my freedom. I no longer feel safe in my neighborhood. I constantly worry about my mother and sister, and taking public transportation is no longer an option. I feel limited where I can go. At the same time, that moment on the train, it was empowering. I moved past my fears and publicly shared my story as a way to bring awareness to the fact that racist and xenophobic attacks are happening to Asians and Asian Americans. We can't stay silent. We have to speak out for ourselves for the sake of our families, our community, and the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Congressman Chu. I think you were on mute for a second there, but I assume that you introduced me. Very good.
Wait a minute. Okay. Thank you, Tani, for your most moving testimony. And now we have the distinguished guest, John Yang.
Thank you very much, Congressman Chu. It's always a delight to be before KPAC members as well as Congressman Joaquin Castro. As you heard, my name is John Yang. I'm the President and Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, and really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you talk to all of you about anti-Asian racism during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I appreciate Congressman Castro's shout out for the census, because that's another area that all of our communities are very concerned about, especially in light of the changes most recently announced by the Census Bureau, pushing up the response date until September 30th. The previous witnesses testified about the scope and real-world impact of these hate incidents, and you have my written testimony. So what I thought I would do is focus specifically on one specific cause and one specific action item that people can take. So one specific cause is the lack of care used when talking about the causes of the pandemic and why it has spread. Now, we all know that the virus knows no boundaries and is not transmitted because of ethnicity. We also know that it came to the United States most likely both through Europe and through Asia. But when elected leaders and people in the media say that the virus comes from China or that the Chinese caused this virus to spread, it is also causing this virus of racism to spread. Now, to be clear, as both of our members of Congress have said, it is legitimate to question the Chinese government about its response to COVID-19, its human rights abuses, freedom of speech, and even its lack of transparency with respect to COVID-19. But that is very different than making blanket statements about the Chinese people, about China, or Chinese culture. We also must be conscious of the effect of real-world politics on racism. Now, I know that all the members here know the story of Vincent Chin and how he was murdered as a hate crime in 1982 by two out-of-work auto workers in Detroit. This hate crime was perpetrated against him because of the trade war between the United States and Japan at that time. We cannot let similar geopolitical tensions between the US and China now cause similar racism. Now, one specific action item I want to draw people's attention to is bystander intervention training. And both Tanny as well as the next speaker will talk about incidents that took place and how bystanders help. So our organization, along with a partner organization named Hollaback, is offering bystander intervention training that focuses on what we call the 5 Ds: distract, delay, delegate, document, and direct. And these are common sense techniques that people can use to really allow them to intervene in a safe way. And these are techniques that Tanny talked about in terms of having the African-American woman give her a look to give her some self-assurance. And Zach will talk about in terms of directly confronting the aggressor. All of these different techniques are techniques that we would ask people to use. In this time, we've trained over 12,000 individuals to engage in these de-escalation techniques. We're not asking people to be heroes and superheroes in any sense. We want people to be physically safe, but there are these small common sense things that people can do to help the Asian American community feel a little bit safer. Certainly leadership matters right now, and we appreciate all of you as leaders taking this by the horns and really calling out the racism for what it is and finding solutions to this racism. So thank you for holding this hearing. I would be happy to take questions later.
Thank you so much, John Yang. And next, I'd like to call upon Zach Owen to share his testimony.
Hello, members of Congress and esteemed guests. My name is Zach Owen, and I want to thank you for inviting me to testify today. I live in Midland, Texas, and work for Sam's Club. On March 14th, I just got off my break. I was walking from the front to the back of the store, and I seen one of my coworkers kind of frantic on the walkie talking about a manager saying someone had been stabbed. And as I got to the back, I said, "Who stabbed who?" And she said, "This guy comes walking around the corner and he's got a big jacket on and concealing the knife." And he just had this crazy look. Like I knew it was him before she said it. So I start following him. But my manager was saying to stay back, stay back. So I wanted to be obedient and I stayed back. Yeah, he went for the father, pulled the knife out, and then slashed at the father. The father jumped back and said, "Come on." And instead he slashed the little boy from his ear all across his face. And I remember seeing blood and his white meat and his ears hanging. And then he went back to stab again. And then that's when I intervened. I grabbed him. We wrestled a little bit, and I took him to the ground and I had him in a chokehold until an off-duty Border Patrol agent was able to show up. And he took it over from there. He put a badge on my face, so I rolled off him. And then I just got out and tended to my wounds. I was cut pretty bad in my hand. And I was walking towards the back to wash up. And then I'd been stabbed in my leg, but I didn't know at the time. I thought it was just like a Charlie when I hit the ground. I hit the ground hard. That's why I was sore. But come to find out, I had a hole in my pants and I was bleeding. So I took off my belt and made a turn up and walked to the front of the store and waited. And this guy, he attacked the family. Of course, we all know because he thought they were Chinese, and he said he was the exterminator of the coronavirus. The words that came out. Yeah, that's what I have to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach. Your story is incredible. I thank you for your courage and for rushing in to save this family. And I'm sure you prevented further damage from being done and saved their lives. So I really, really express my appreciation on behalf of the whole country for your courage and bravery. And then our final witness, Commissioner Michael Yaki, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Congresswoman Chu. Members of Congress, distinguished guests, I am Michael Yaki, a commissioner in the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. I was first appointed in 2005 upon the recommendation of then Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. I'm in my third 6-year term. And on a personal note, I am Japanese, Chinese, and Hawaiian in descent. My mother is a first-generation Chinese American, and my father is a third-generation Japanese American whose family was interned during World War II and who served our country as a career Foreign Service officer and a diplomat in the State Department. As an independent fact-finding federal agency, the Civil Rights Commission's mission is to inform the development of national civil rights policy and enhance enforcement of federal civil rights laws. As the nation's civil rights watchdog, we have a unique responsibility during these times of crisis to speak out on behalf of communities who are impacted by this crisis. We specifically noted, in fact, twice this year already, our concern over the increase in xenophobic animosity toward Asian Americans and perceived Asian Americans as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Anti-Asian racism has a bitter legacy in the recent history of our country, beginning in the 1800s with the forced segregations of Chinatowns and Manila towns, the Rock Springs Massacre in 1803, the Exclusion Acts and alien land laws, and of course, the internment of Japanese Americans. But even today, in our most recent report on hate crimes, the Commission discussed research findings that hate crimes are, quote, fueled by racial anxieties or social change that are perceived as threatening, end quote, like the attacks on September 11th or now the coronavirus. In the current circumstances, people are frightened for their health and the health of their families and their economic security. But that makes it all the more imperative that no American is ostracized or discriminated against solely because of their race or national origin, and the federal government has an important role in addressing that. We have worked together with you and have put forth recommendations to the federal government and to, at your request, Congresswoman Chu, to deal with anti-Asian sentiment. And some of these recommendations are all federal civil rights offices should use enforcement where necessary to secure rights violated within their jurisdictions. All federal officials must communicate and act in a manner that demonstrates to communities that the federal government will protect all Americans regardless of race, color, creed. Federal officials should make sure to communicate the resources available for individuals and communities who might be targeted, specifically to address hate crimes and bias-motivated incidents, including working with Asian American organizations or community groups that provide assistance to Asian residents in our country, provide leadership and assurance that anti-Asian harassment, slurs, bullying, aggression, and violence are not to be tolerated. These and other things we've already reported. Thank you very much for this hearing. We look forward to your questions. Again, thank you very much. And thank you, Zach, for your leadership and courage.
Thank you, Commissioner Yaki. And I want to thank all of our witnesses, and especially Tanny and Zach, for courageously sharing your personal stories. Now we will move on to our questions, and each member of Congress will be recognized for 5 minutes. I will begin my questions and then recognize my colleagues, each for 5 minutes. Tanny, I remember how alarmed I was when I first learned about your story on the news and saw the video you had recorded. What we didn't realize at the time is that this would be just the beginning of what has become an alarming pattern of hate incidents targeting Asian Americans. So I want to thank you for your courage to document the racist assault you faced and to share your story publicly. Unfortunately, we've had far too many Asian Americans who have been the victims of verbal and physical assaults during this pandemic. But they may feel afraid to share their stories. They may feel hesitant to share their stories. Why do you think it's important for them to speak up and to report their story, certainly to the hate crime sites, but also to speak out?
Thank you for the thoughtful questions. To be honest with you, when it happened to me, I also hesitated about sharing. I was always taught to keep your head down, move forward, and let's just leave the past in the past. But really, what for me was thinking about, what if this happened to my mother? What if this happened to people who I felt were more vulnerable than me? How would they feel? How would they deal with this? And that stirred me to want to really bring awareness to the rest of the Asian American community on what was happening. I think, having gone through that it is really important for victims of any hate crime to step forward, because it's our way of saying, we're Americans, we belong here, this is happening to us, and we don't want this anymore, that it is not okay. The other point of this too is, it's thinking about our future. I think about my friends' children, and then I reflect back on how I grew up and how terrible it felt for me to be an outsider. And for me, stepping forward and going beyond my fears is also about making sure that the next generation of Asians and Asian Americans won't have to experience what I experienced. That we should just be seen as people and not segmented as Asians or others or Asian Americans.
Thank you, Tenny. Zach, you are a true hero. I was so moved to hear your story. First of all, I want to check with you on your recovery from your injuries. How are you doing there?
Okay, I'm doing okay. I had physical therapy, surgery. I got 40% grip strength in my hand. It's never gonna be the same. I got pain still in my pinky. Like I don't know what they've given me medication right now for. They don't know. They're talking about maybe a second surgery to fix it. But I mean, he did a pretty good job. I just can't straighten my middle finger out or the pinky. And they had cut the tendon completely out of my pinky because they couldn't repair it. But other than that, it's healing well, I guess. It's not too bad.
So I just want to thank you for your incredible courage, because really you saved the lives of this family of 3 children, ages 2 and 6. And I just can't imagine what would have happened had you not come along. So what motivated you to intervene in this situation? And now that you've had some time to reflect, how do you feel about that day?
Well, let's see. I just don't like seeing people being picked on, violence or racism. And what he was doing, he was attacking people, and I just wanted to. I felt that I could do something to stop that. And whenever he stabbed the baby, there was no thought. It was just a reaction, like within. It was there to stop it, and because I thought he had killed the baby, and I wanted to stop him from harming anybody else, because most definitely he was out to murder the family. Yeah, it's just kind of who I am. Way I was brought up. Look out for others. I believe we're all Americans. We don't need to look at each other as Chinese American or Mexican. No, we're Americans. We all need to stand together, and there's no room for racism right now, especially these harsh times. Yeah. So, and what was was there a second question?
No, thank you for that. You expressed it so well. Thank you for believing that everybody needs to be safe, and it's people like you that will make sure that we are a better America. So thank you for that. And now I'd like to call on Congressmember Joaquin Castro for 5 minutes.
Oh, did y'all have a question?
To ask a question.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
No. Well, first I wanted to say to my fellow Texans, again, thank you for your bravery and for your courage. And can you tell me what the reaction in Midland was and after the incident there?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah. What was the reaction in Midland, Odessa, and that whole area of Texas after the incident?
Oh, I got labeled as a hero. They're pretty nice about it. There's a news coverage, a bunch of media want me to do interviews, but I'm not big on that. So I did one just to get the truth out there, the right story, because they had media was putting all kinds of crazy stuff. So I just gave my testimony to the news media, and they just considered me a hero. The cops, all the cops, the paramedics, they all thanked me. They're trying to recruit me into the Midland PD or military. They want me to look into those things. They asked me if I've thought of other options besides SAMS, so we're looking into that as well. If my hand doesn't disqualify me, that's what we're going to a recruiter to talk about. But yeah.
No, thank you. And I asked that question because it's been, if there is a silver lining, one of the silver linings, as we've seen a lot of these hate crimes happen, is that communities will rally around, the families and the victims, but also the folks who have helped to intervene. And that's been very encouraging to see Americans of different backgrounds come together to protect each other.
Yes.
And Penny, what did you experience there in Los Angeles?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, what was your experience after your incident in LA?
For me, I posted it on social media, and I instantly had strangers from all over the world really reach out to me and letting me know that they're in support of me. For me, it was a beautiful moment because here was this incident that randomly happened to me, and I was just sharing it to share with my small community, and it somehow reached as far as New Zealand, and I was able to have conversations about it, and people from around the world who were wanting to know more about the racial issues that we have here in America. So I was given that opportunity to have conversation.
Well, of course, I think one of the reasons that I wanted to join this forum as chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus is because we've seen a lot of hate directed at the Hispanic community and Latino community, as you all know as well. We've had a lot of our young boys and girls at football games and basketball games be called wetback and other slurs. And to see it happen also to communities like the Asian community, Asian American community, of course, is very troubling for us and very disheartening. But you'll have our support in getting the word out to try to stop this kind of hate. So with that, Judy, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. And next, I would like to recognize Congressman Mark Takano for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Chu. Zach, Owen, I'm glad my camera was turned off because I found myself wincing, cringing at the description of what occurred. It was very difficult to listen to you, and that's not your fault. But to hear the story about what happened, the brutality and the rage that you intervened on, it's an incredible story. And I'm very moved by it. I want to just thank you for stepping forward as a human being and as an American to protect people. You weren't even sworn to do that. That's your job is to work at a retail store. Can you tell me? I mean, I don't want to get too personal, but how long had you worked at that Sam's Club?
I've been with Sam's Club for about 8 months now, going on 9 months.
So you're a relatively new employee. Do you have any, were you going to college part-time? What were you doing?
No, I moved down here just to, I was looking for oil field work. So I took this job in the meantime because it was close to where I lived and I was saving up money. Then I was starting to look for oil field work, but it had all kind of gone away by now. So,
Now, how have you paid for your medical bills?
well, Sam's has covered pretty much everything except my family doctor with personal issues as to my mental state. I guess they've been put on antidepressants and anxiety pills because
So-
they say I have PTSD.
Well, that would make sense to me. And so your mental health coverage is not covered by SAMS.
Well, they wanted me to. What they recommended was like a therapist or something over the phone, and it took them a while to get that ball rolling. And I just didn't think it'd be very useful or helpful just to talk over the phone. You know, I want to see eye contact, body language, and just feel more like, I don't know. I just thought it'd be better if I could see him in person, but I wasn't able to.
So Sam recommended the telemental health instead of the in-person, or is the COVID pandemic been what's been in the way of you being able to get mental health coverage?
And that's been a big issue with it. COVID's put a kink in things.
Madam Chair, it's occurred to me. Excuse me. It's occurred to me that, and this is also stemmed out of gun violence incidents where we've had mass gun incidents, where victims are at a loss as to where to get their medical coverage, the ongoing mental health issues that follow people in times like this. It's not together clear where what rights they have. And here, Zach is not a sworn peace officer, he's a citizen bystander. I think we need to do more for bystanders than give them training on intervening. I think we need to also take care of bystanders who, excuse me, I did get a COVID-19 test a couple of days ago, so I'm pretty sure it's not COVID. So to reassure all of you, it's the smoky air from the fires here that's lingering. So I want to take that off your minds. But it strikes me that in incidents like this with a bystander, a Good Samaritan bystander who puts himself or herself on the line and gets injured and is physically injured, there's the issue of vocational rehabilitation, training. Zach, your choices shouldn't, I mean, if you want to be a police officer, you want to go in the armed services, that's something that I think is great. That shouldn't be your only choices. I think America and the public, all of us owe a debt of gratitude to you because you're protecting the civil rights of another person, the dignity of other people. And I think bystanders like you deserve more than just a thank you. I think we need to make sure that we take care of your mental health, your medical bills, and I also think we need to look at a young person like you, how we make sure that you have an opportunity to get to where you want to go, because I think we want to encourage what you've done in all American citizens. We need to push back against the hate, the bigotry, the nationalism, the hyper rhetoric. And one way we can do that is to let young citizens like you know that the American people have your back, and we need to do more. So I yield back, Madam Speaker, with that, Madam Chair, with that sentiment.
Okay, thank you so much. And next we recognize Congressmember Ted Lieu for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Judy. I want to thank Chairwoman Chu and Joaquin Castro, Karen Bass, and Deb Holland for co-hosting this terrific event. Thank you, Zach, for your courage, your actions, lives, and that's something you're going to carry with the rest of your life, and you should be commended for that, and we all owe you a debt of gratitude. In terms of what we're seeing today, it is not that different from what's happened to Asian Americans in our country's history. When there has been fear and other events that have caused fear among the American people, there's a tendency to then scapegoat minorities. So we've had, for example, the whole yellow peril hysteria. We had the Chinese Exclusion Act. We had the of Japanese Americans, the murder of Vincent Chen. And now we have people committing hate crime incidents against Asian Americans out of this bizarre view that somehow Asians are spreading COVID-19. So my first question is to Ms. Kulkarni. As of today, how many hate incidents and hate crimes have you tracked, and what obstacles are there to people reporting such incidents?
Thank you, Congressman Liu, for your question. So thus far, we have just under 2,600 incident reports made to stop AAPI hate. And what we understand in terms of some of those obstacles are that in some cases people don't necessarily know about our reporting center. We're of course doing the best we can to provide that information. Additionally, there is that fear and trepidation that people have. What we try to make clear about our reporting center, and I know the ones from Advancing Justice and other organizations do the same in terms of keeping personal information, identifying information confidential. We don't release any of that information without the explicit permission of individuals. And so we really are encouraging folks to, as much as possible, report to us, because it's so critical in developing policy solutions, working with elected officials such as yourself, and also developing needed resources. So it's only when we know and understand the data, and we have 5 to 10 researchers on this at all times, looking at various trends and patterns. And so the other point I want to make too is that our forum is available in 11 Asian languages. So individuals should not feel that if they're not English proficient that they cannot fill out the forms. So again, the key to us is just getting the word out to folks, making sure that they're aware of the resources, and also addressing that fear element, because as Tammy herself had said, that individuals are, we are raised to, to just put our heads down, work hard, not to raise certain issues. And so it's as a result of that, I think that a number of folks haven't necessarily come forward. Go ahead, please.
What is the website where they can report these incidents?
It is stopaapihate.org.
Great,
thank you.
So recently, I worked with Judy Chu and other members of KBAC and led a letter signed by 150 bipartisan members of Congress to the Department of Justice, asking basically the Department of Justice to do more. And so my question is to both John and Michael, what do you believe the Department of Justice can do to try to mitigate this issue of hate crimes against Asian Americans?
Well, this is John. Let me start. First thing is, and this isn't just on the Department of Justice, but I would ask Congress to pass the No Hate Act, because the No Hate Act would give a lot more resources to both state and local government for the reporting of hate crimes and hate incidents. As Manju said, part of the problem is resources. Her organization and other organizations like ours, we're just limited in terms of how much reach we can get out into the community about the resources that are available, about the need to report. But if through the No Hate Act, among other things, that would allow the federal government to give grants to state and local governments so that they can establish hotlines, they can establish locally trained officers, not to say that law enforcement is the only solution, but locally trained people to gather this data, because this data is what's going to drive good solutions. So that's number one. Number two, on the DOJ side, specifically, even without the legislation, it is to be more transparent in their reporting. Frankly, with this DOJ, it has been very, very hard to engage with respect to sort of what they are actually seeing other than broad statements. So as to push them, they say that they are making this a priority. We don't understand yet what that means. We don't understand what resources they actually are devoting to this being a priority for them. So other than their statements, we need to have more transparency there.
I would agree with that, with what John just said. The fact is that entities like the Community Relations Service and others have been activated in the way they have been in other incidents of national emergency, like an earthquake or a hurricane. And this is the kind of thing where DOJ needs to step up to the plate and step up in a big way. And it's been pretty, as John said, pretty obtuse and opaque about exactly what it is they are doing. I mean, hate crimes data is great, but a lot of what's going on is not just hate crimes, but just anti-bias, just plain out discrimination that doesn't rise to the level of a hate crime for the purpose of data collection, which is why the No Hate Act is important to get through. I would also just note that, in terms of the federal government, there's one big entity that is really not paying attention to anything that certainly that we have said, but certainly a lot of what people here have said. That's the executive office of the president. You just cannot keep on repeating every press conference Chinese flu and expect it not to have some kind of damaging impact on people's perception of Asian Americans.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. And now I recognize Congressmember Bobby Scott for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Judy, and thank you for holding this important briefing. If this wasn't what we all know this problem exists. That's why the Black Caucus and Hispanic Caucus were willing to co-sponsor it, because it's not limited just to Asians. And I'd like to ask Commissioner Yaki a question. We know, as you suggested, if it's an assault, it's criminal. But we're just wondering if the commission has recommended some things that can happen. I know with Black Lives Matter, that's provoked the taking down of a lot of Confederate statutes. Are there things that we can do that could make a difference?
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Scott, for those questions. I mean, the commission has taken this issue up twice already. We have tried to speak our truth in terms of the need to combat this kind of sentiment across the country. And yes, this COVID-19 affects all communities. But in this particular instance, we have asked every federal agency to basically activate its civil rights entity within it to start publicizing the need to put resources and guidance out there. And so far, all we've really seen is HHS, EEOC, HUD, and Department of Education putting out guidance. And the fact is that this guidance is, especially for the Asian community, there are shortcomings. And also, and for the Latino community as well. For example, EEOC puts out has a translation for its webpage about origin and race discrimination in the workplace during COVID-19, but all they use is Google Translate as the way to get that done. And there are serious deficiencies in Google Translate, and then they don't offer any other language. And has been noted before, there are myriad of languages within the Asian American community that need to be utilized. And I think that one of the most important things that Congress can do is provide both its oversight and, quite frankly, its appropriating authority. Having been worked for Congress before, I sort of know about this part of it, which is the ability to use the appropriation power to require that the agencies put funds to use to ensure that there is language access for all communities affected by COVID-19. That's the one area that I think is extremely deficient, but where the federal government, even more than others, has the kind of resources to put out there, so that if you're in public housing and you're being discriminated against, if you're at a workplace and you're being discriminated against, if you're at a school and your child is being bullied, the ability for parents and children to access this in the most comfortable environment in which they can use, which is frequently their original native language, is extremely important. And we're not doing that right now, and I think needs to be done forthwith.
Thank you. John Yang, a question. What kind of lawsuits or legal remedies are you seeking? I know you're seeking legislation, but are you filing lawsuits to try to move the ball forward?
Unfortunately, as Manju said, most of these cases really don't rise to the level of a hate crime. So in terms of trying to file a lawsuit, that would be difficult. Certainly, there are times that we would look at white nationalist groups and think about whether there are certain civil rights statutes you might be able to use against a white nationalist group. That obviously requires a lot of time or a lot of resources to do that, but certainly that's something that we would look to. I think what Commissioner Yaki said, and a number of you have said, is really on point also, is that we just have to call this out for what this is. One thing that comes to my mind is, back in the 2008 election, Senator McCain, when he was campaigning at a political rally, a woman said, I can't trust Obama. He's Muslim. He might be a terrorist. He's not born in this country. Senator McCain took away the microphone from her, and he said, no, ma'am, you're wrong. He's a fine Christian man. I happen to disagree with him on policy and think I would be a better president, but he's a fine man. Fast forward 12 years later to a political rally in Arizona, and President Trump is presented with essentially the same situation. Group of people are yelling, Kung flu, Kung flu. What does he do? He smiles, he laughs, and says, yeah, Kung flu, that's right. That's the difference in leadership that really can move the needle here and what we really need.
Well, we're trying to change that, but we'll do the best we can. This is not a political event, but you know what I mean. Thank you, Judy. Judy, you're still on mute.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and now I would like to recognize Congressmember Al Green for 5 minutes, and I believe he's joining us by phone.
I am, and I regret that I'm not with you by way of other technology. I have been at a testing site, and we're trying our best to encourage more people to take the test for the virus. I thank you, Madam Chair, for convening this very much needed opportunity. I'd like to thank Chairperson Castro and Chairwoman Bass as well. I see that they're all associated with the endeavor. I'd like to associate myself with what Representative Scott just said about this not being a political event, because there are many things that I'd like to say. It is a policy event, and I think it's fair to say, as a matter of policy, that we should have impeached a racist bigot who now occupies the White House. He is xenophobic, and we are seeing the results of our persons on this phone, but many who have tolerated this xenophobia, this Islamophobia, this hate that he engenders, that he perpetuates, that he perpetrates. And I've seen some of what's happened right here in my community. We have had a Confucius Institute that was on the campus of Texas Southern University closed as a result of actions promoted by the president. We've had the consulate closed here, and word spread throughout the community that there were spies. I've had persons from the community to call me concerned about the stigma associated with the language, such that it is thought that agents in the main are spies. And we've had to have a precedent and talk about this. We've had the international district. The language in my district on the ballot is in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Chinese. And in the international district, we've had businesses that are closing because of rumors that have run amok in terms of where the virus is, and calling out business places where the virus is. So there's a lot going on, and we do have to do some things. We have to be bold. Be bold. Let's do things that make a long-term difference. I appreciate what Congresswoman Barbara Lee is doing, and I support Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission that she's pushing. I'm going to support that. I appreciate what Congresswoman Jackson Lee is doing, and I support what Congresswoman Jackson Lee is doing. But I'm told that I'm not being heard. Madam Chair, am I being heard? Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, Congressmember Green, you're coming through loud and clear, actually.
Okay, thank you. As I was saying, I support Congresswoman Jackson Lee and her legislation for reparations. There's also a piece of legislation for a Department of Reconciliation. We need a department at the highest level of this government, the Secretary of Reconciliation, to reconcile issues related to all persons who are in protected classes. And I think that these other issues that are being raised by my colleagues are very important, and all of these I think we should support. But that's my opinion. So let me move to the policy person with the on the panel, Mr. Carney. What are your thoughts about taking this to a different level, having a Department of Reconciliation, taking up the reconciliation issue, and also the issue associated with truth, racial healing, and transformation that Congresswoman Lee has raised, and the reparations issue that Congresswoman Jackson Lee has raised? Your thoughts, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Congressman Green, for your question.
Forgive me for saying sir. I apologize for sir. Please forgive me.
No worries, no worries. Thank you for your question. And we couldn't agree more. I think that this is really the moment in time where we need a true reckoning. When you look at not only the data from Stop AAPI Hate, but also a recent Pew study, not only are Asian Americans being verbally assaulted, but also African Americans. And the Pew study found that 30% of Asian Americans, so that's literally 1.5 million Americans, have experienced some sort of racial slur or derogatory remark. And similarly, 40% of African Americans, so even a much greater number. And so it's so important right now, given what has happened. And I think what you point to is the fact that we have an opportunity right now to come together as communities of color. We see and understand the bigotry that really comes from white supremacy, as John mentioned. And so if we have an opportunity moving forward, we absolutely support that and support any efforts, I think, of all of these communities of color to come together to talk about what's been happening on a policy level, what's been happening in terms of racist rhetoric. So thank you for your question.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair, again. You have been a part of the avant-garde, and you're making a difference. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Congressmember Green, and the gentleman yields back. And now we recognize the Congressmember from California, Barbara Lee.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry I'm late and I didn't get to hear the panel, but I had some technical difficulties getting on. But also, I know our chairwoman, Congresswoman Bass, has been trying to get on also. So in the event she doesn't, I just wanted to say thank you on her behalf and to say how important it is that the Tri-Caucus, Congresswoman Judy Chu, Congressman Castro, and Congresswoman Bass really come together, stick together, because what affects one affects all. I associate myself with everything that Congressman Green just said in terms of the issues around developing Secretary of Reconciliation, of course, HR 100 calling for a day of reckoning, truth, racial healing, transformation, and reparations, HR 40, because this is the moment that we have to put our government in check, so that we can move forward in a government with a government that eradicates hate from its DNA. Couple of things, again, I'm sorry I didn't hear the panel, but I heard some of the dialogue afterwards and wanted to ask you first to Michael. It's good to see you, Michael, and you certainly are missed. And you mentioned the appropriations, and of course, Grace Meng, myself, we both serve on the Appropriations Committee. What you posed was very interesting in terms of a funding strategy or lack of for our Appropriations Committee as it relates to language access. And I'm wondering, because we did work together as a tri-caucus with Congresswoman Bass, Chu, and Castro to get really strong language in on demographic data reporting based on ethnicity, race, socioeconomic status, and what have you. But of course, CDC still hadn't done it. But having said that, I think with the HEROES bill, as these negotiations, if they move forward, if they have a way of opening up, what do you think about us as a tri-caucus trying to advocate? That would be only 3 or 4 lines, actually, in the HEROES bill. Otherwise, maybe Grace and myself and others can work on an approach strategy for next year, because this hate is growing. This occupant in the White House saying what he is saying is despicable, and it's perpetrating, as we see, so much violence in the AAPI community now. And so just wanted to ask you about that, and then maybe to John or anyone who wants to respond about street heat, because I'm still an activist, and I believe in activist member of Congress, and I believe we're too quiet right now about this anti-Asian hate and racism. And for me personally, I'd like to see some of our local communities partner with the Dreamers and with our Black Movement for Black Lives and with the AAPI community and have a protest just around this specific issue, because this has got to stop, and we've got to hit the streets, I think, because we know this Department of Justice, and we all support all of the bills that are pending, and we know what they're going to do. And like Congressman Scott said, we have a few more months, we have some more work to do, but hopefully we'll be able to get rid of this regime. But I think the street heat right now is absolutely necessary. And I think we should talk about some kind of external day of mobilization around anti-Asian hate bashing or racism or whatever, however we want to do it together.
Well, I miss working with you too, Congress. With regard to whether the HEROES Act or some other CARES legislation can have something in there, I'm going to say that I represent the entire commission at this point, so we haven't taken a position on that, but we can. But I would say this: we do believe that there are substantial means by which you can exercise oversight through the oversight committees or through the appropriations process over, for example, the Department of Justice Federal Coordination and Compliance Section, which reviews and approves each federal agency's internal and external limited English proficiency access guidelines. And these are they're the central body. And what they are doing or not doing, I think is important to find out, because again, as we know from all of our experiences, whether it's John Tanny, Madrusha, others, the Asian community is not exactly the best at coming forward when things happen to them on things like this, especially when there's a language barrier. And being able to bridge that language barrier by federal agencies being able to provide that kind of access is going to be really important. So the Department of Justice Federal Coordination and Compliance Section is really key to ensuring that federal agencies across the board have that kind of access.
Okay, well, as co-chair of the Health Task Force for KPAC, I'll talk with Congresswoman Meng and Congresswoman Chu and just see if we can develop with you a strategy, an approach strategy on how we do this. We may want to get started pretty soon just with letters to the agency. But anyway, we'll figure out something, because I think that's a very good suggestion. Now, what about the street heat? John, anybody want to respond on that?
Sure. I think that is wonderful. I think you are absolutely right. We are at a different moment right now than I think we have seen in a while. And I've just been so encouraged by both in the movement for Black Lives, seeing the diversity of people that have been showing up, including Asian Americans. I'll be honest, the Asian American community, it's not only that we've been silent at times, but we have been, elements of our community have been anti-Black. And we have had our own reckoning, and we have sort of had some difficult discussions. So I think that we're at a different moment. you look at the support that people showed for the Dreamers, and this, when I say people, it was all different segments of the community. The coalitions that everyone built for behind the Dreamers, behind the movement for Black Lives. You're right. We're at a different moment where we see that this racism that's been brought about by elements of this administration, but just this dormant racism that we've seen, has come to a different light, right? So that it is both the racism and both the anti-immigrant xenophobia that we've seen. And in that sense, it's positive. It's positive. It's brought us all together in a way that perhaps we haven't had in a while. So I'm going to use this as a mobilizing moment, right? Whether it is we define a specific day, I know that there's supposed to be a march on Washington somewhat soon in the future. Whether that's actually the right time, I don't know yet. But certainly, I am hopeful that in this even small p political moment, that we're coming together in a different way that's palpably different.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Congresswoman Chu. Thank you for your tremendous leadership. You are steady in the course constantly, all the time, keeping us organized and focused, because I'm ready to hit it.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Congressmember Barbara Lee, and the gentlewoman yields back. This actually brings us to the end of the questions from our members of Congress, though I would like to do one follow-up question. We've talked about everything from reporting hate crimes to federal legislation such as the No Hate Act. But could you say, John, more about the bystander intervention? You referred to the 5 Ds, but for the everyday person who might witness such things, what could they do? What are these 5 Ds of bystander intervention?
Sure. So let me talk about the 5 Ds, but I think Tanny and Zach have exemplified them in a way that I couldn't have, right? Because I talk about, it's interesting, because Manju and I talk about statistics, and we talk about how many people we've trained, but we have 2 living examples of people that have intervened, as well as people that have experienced what it means to be part of a hate incident. So what the 5 Ds are, I'll go through them one by one. One is what's called distract, which means sort of you distract from the aggressor by doing something, just dropping your keys or asking the victim for directions. Hey, how do I get to the next stop? Right? So something that will de-escalate the moment, not focus on the aggressor, but de-escalate the heat that's being generated from the moment. Number 2 is delegate. Is if you see someone that is the victim of a hate incident, you could focus on another bystander. Tanny talked about how there were other people in the subway. It would have been wonderful if someone just said, hey, you go get the transit authority. Do something to bring more help to the situation. So that's what it would mean to delegate. Tanny is a great example of document, which means you record the incident, whether it is during the moment by iPhone or video or after the fact through any of our reporting websites, is so that you have that documentary evidence. Because we know too often there are people that say, oh, this isn't really happening. This isn't a real thing, to show that it is a real thing. Number 4 would be delay, which is if you don't feel comfortable in the moment, just asking the victim later, hey, are you okay? Can I get you to safety? Get some resources to that person. And the 5th, which Zach did in a way that I could only dream of, which is to be direct, is to confront the aggressor. Again, we're not asking people to be superheroes like Zach was, because we want people to be safe. But if you feel like you are able to, you can either A, directly confront the aggressor and say, hey, stop that, that's racist, that's wrong, right? Or you could just talk to the victim and say, let me help you get out of this situation, or help them to get to their next stop or whatever. So those are the 5 Ds. Common sense efforts, again, Zach and Tanny demonstrated those in ways that we talk about, but that we want people to use. And they're efforts that can help make the situation just a little bit better. It doesn't reduce all the trauma, cannot do that. I appreciate both of what they have done and what they've been through, but we're just trying to do our little bit to protect the community a little bit more.
Thank you so much. And Zach, do you want to say something? Okay, unmute. Yeah, okay. Unmute. Yeah.
Okay. If one stands up against this people being aggressive or racist, what I found, if you have the courage to stand up, others will follow. Like whenever the attack, the last guy expected to help a 70-year-old man named Louis. He was an Indian man, gray hair. And I didn't know it at the time until after the police report, but he had jumped on his legs and was trying to hold his legs down while we were on the ground. And I thought that was really neat. So just stand together. Don't just let people be picked on. Don't be a bystander. You know, if you stand together, that you have less chance of taking serious harm or death.
That's right. And Zach makes a very good point there, is that oftentimes, as Tanny experienced, people don't know what to do. They're too shy, they're too timid. And so if one person takes into the stand, other people will follow. Part of what this training also provides is makes people comfortable saying, hey, this is something that I can do, right? Because oftentimes for the people in the subway, I don't necessarily blame them for not doing anything. I wish they would have, but oftentimes they're not sure if what they're going to do is going to make the situation worse. And so what things like this, and we're not the only ones who offer this training, what people do here is say, this is okay, this works, this is going to help the situation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. First of all, let me thank our distinguished panelists for sharing your expertise and your personal experiences. It made for such an important forum, and we all learned so much. And I'd like to thank my co-hosts, Congressional Hispanic Caucus Chair Joaquin Castro, as well as Congressional Black Caucus Chair Karen Bass for co-hosting this, as well as all of our Congressional Asian Pacific Caucus members who participated in today's Congressional Forum. Having the opportunity to hear from all of you about the threats that Asian Americans are facing is so critical as we work to address anti-Asian coronavirus bigotry and ensure that all Americans feel safe in this country. Thank you again for joining us. And now this forum is adjourned.